There are 41,000 Buddhist practitioners in New Zealand. Visibly represented by a few foreign-looking monks with shaved heads and coloured robes, most practitioners are in fact indistinguishable on the street. Ordinary Kiwis and Asian immigrants who've chosen to embrace the 2,500-year-old teachings of one awakened Indian man as a practical approach to the challenges of life in a technological Western society. Buddhism first arrived on our shores almost 150 years ago, when 6,000 immigrant Chinese gold miners brought their religious rites with them. Small numbers of books written by intrepid Western travellers to Asia in the early 20th century found their way into the hands of philosophically inclined, educated Kiwis, such as members of the Theosophical Society. By the mid-60s, Buddhism remained elite and remote, with only 650 followers. But in the 70s it began to flower under the power of the hippies, the peace movement, and the latent influence of America's Beat generation. As the 21st century takes root, so has Buddhism. 1 in every 100 New Zealand residents is Buddhist, including 10,000 Pākehā Kiwis.
Well, about 30 years ago, this month actually, in March, my husband and I were having traveled through Africa. We were in Asia and we arrived in Kathmandu 3 days before this meditation course started in a monastery, Tibetan monastery in Nepal. And he ran into his old friends, his old flatmates in Auckland, and they were going to do this course, and they said, "Why don't you come along?" So we decided to. And it was 28 days. Residential, and really changed our lives. I think we were really impressed with the teacher because he was so unusual, so warm and friendly and funny and compassionate, and the teachings were so logical and made sense. And we started to do the practices, and over the years it just grew.
In New Zealand I lived most of my working days in hospitals, and then for the last 12 years was in a community, riverside community, which is near Nelson, horticultural, agricultural. And so that's the kind of working background. And how I came to Zen, I've been concerned with religion all my life and followed Christianity till I was 50. And found it was actually not helping me at all, and began to look elsewhere and found the Tibetans and was with them for a while. And then while I was doing a retreat at the Tibetan Centre north of Auckland at Kaukopakapa, one of the other people there said she'd heard a Zen teacher in Auckland, and she had one of his tapes. Would I like to listen to it? So of course it was Daido Roshi, and I realised what he was teaching was exactly what the Tibetans were teaching, but in much more accessible language. The Tibetan culture puts up a lot of barriers for me, and he removed most of the Japanese barriers, so it was only American barriers I had to encounter.
Way back, I remember when I was about 17 or 18, I thought there must be more to life than getting drunk on Friday nights and hoeing around in cars and checking out women and all that sort of thing, but I never quite knew where it rested. I hunted for a long time. I've been involved with quite a few, with the Hare Krishna group. Not I didn't shave my hair and everything, but I used to go to group meetings with them in Auckland when I lived in Auckland, and I was a member of the Auckland School of Philosophy for a few years. And it wasn't till, in fact it was just when Philippa and I met 10 or 12 years ago that Philippa went to a retreat centre up in Coromandel. She actually went there just to have a break, but she'd had a little bit of involvement with Tibetan Lamas before that, and it just was coincidental that when she went to this retreat centre the day after she got there, a 5-week Lam Rim course with a very high Tibetan Lama was just starting. So she did that course and came home raving about this, all that she'd learnt. And of course I was actually just courting Philippa at that time, and I was trying to impress her that I was a great meditator and all this sort of thing. I didn't have a clue what I was doing really, but
I think probably developed because I thought I could be happier than I was, and so I was like an existential and to some degree psychological journey, of spiritual journey of wanting to be happier. And I read Buddhist writings, people like Alan Watts, sort of Westerners talking about Buddhism, and 20 years ago, I guess, and it just sort of had a nice ring to it. I just thought, oh, this sounds interesting. So I went to Asia and travelled and visited monasteries and started doing meditation.
But not all Buddhism in New Zealand has arrived here by choice. This temple in Wellington is the spiritual centre of the Cambodian community. Cambodians began settling in New Zealand in the late 70s, fleeing the turmoil in their homeland during the reign of the Khmer Rouge. Yaran, a Cambodian monk, explains what effect this had on Buddhism in his homeland.
All the people became hate together. They not only killing, they got much suffering all the time for 3 years. That's why, because of the Buddhists have been destroyed and cut off. But fortunately, after that, in 1980, the Buddhist religion has risen again in Cambodia.
Cambodians are the largest refugee-based population in New Zealand. Over 5,000 are currently settled here. Of these, 3,500 are Theravadan Buddhists. Temples provide a familiar space for immigrants grappling with Kiwi culture. Monks and nuns, as leaders of the temple, provide social and spiritual support.
I came to New Zealand by the Cambodian community. Need monks to believe because of their own religion, their own belief. The Buddhism need monks to representative of the Buddha.
Moving to New Zealand has meant some parts of the traditional monastic routine, such as begging for alms, have fallen by the wayside.
Because no people to go and just Cambodian can do that, and no people in New Zealand. And most people go to work. I think New Zealand is much better to live in than Cambodia. The money is not so hard. It's compared to Cambodia. But what I like in Cambodia is easy to live because many monks, young monks and the old monks, different kind of the monks live together, and a lot of monks can discuss and see the ideas together and talk, give a speech. A lot of people come to listen, and we can teach all the children to be a good man, a good woman, a good girl, a good boy, like that. But here, yes, I just live alone, and talk to monks, to tell the old ladies. Yes, but live is easier than Cambodian here, but just different a little bit.
Like its Cambodian cousin, Vietnamese Buddhism also arrived in New Zealand as part of a refugee resettlement program. 5 years ago, Dao Nguyen was invited to Auckland by the local Vietnamese Buddhist community.
Most Vietnamese people came to live in New Zealand by refugee. Some of them they left Vietnam because the economic, but some of them left Vietnam because the government. In Vietnam we have Buddhist community, like we call Sangha community, but in New Zealand only one Vietnamese temple. We haven't got Sangha community. It's quite hard for us to live here.
Buddhism's survival has been due, in part, to its pragmatic approach to life and its capacity to adapt to changing conditions, to meet the here and now. Shakyamuni Buddha was born in northern India in 500 BC. He said, "Don't take my word for what I've experienced, find out for yourself." And a wide number of followers did just that in his lifetime, and after his death at age 80. Many of his teachings were written down and have been extensively translated, but the teachings spread mind to mind, sometimes by wandering monks, but also through the support and curiosity of the aristocracy. Wherever Buddhism took root, its teachings blended with local traditions, giving a variety of spins to the Dhamma. From northern India, the Theravadan school of Buddhism spread to Sri Lanka, Burma, and Southeast Asia, while the Mahayana school travelled further east, through Tibet and China. "50 years ago, Buddhism's survival in Asia became threatened by both communism and the growth of consumerism. What had begun as a vibrant living practice had also in some places stagnated into religious dogma. That propelled Buddhism's dramatic leap to the West and saw the beginning of a new chapter in Buddhism's long and colourful history.
I think Buddhism's got pretty good press, generally. I think many people still would see it as quite a foreign thing and quite adorned in shaven heads and robes. And
what do you see as the difference between Buddhism and the other major world religions?
Well, obviously the differences are huge when you look at Islam, which is so close to Christianity and Judaism. Whereas when you look at Hinduism, you realize instantly that Buddhism is a product of the Indian soil and that it came from Hinduism and still shares many things with Hinduism, such as the acceptance of the reality of karma and reincarnation, and the importance of meditation. So, however, the idea of God, to which many students brought up in the Western society are used, is totally inapplicable in Buddhism, as many writers on the subject have explained. So I use this as one of the major challenges of this paper, to explain that it is possible to move into a tradition that has no image at all about God, not even in the negative sense, about a personal God. And that this is a healthy challenge that we should be willing to face.
I think I encounter a lot of confusion around the notion of emptiness, which is a fundamental Buddhist teaching and experience. And typically emptiness is considered to be either some sort of black hole, a kind of void, or again something that leads to a state of dispassion or unconcern. And in fact, emptiness is, when we think of it this way, is a concept. But the word is pointing to a reality which is beyond concept. And so it's always accurate to say that no matter what the idea about emptiness may be, it's not accurate.
For me, the difference was very much that when Buddha was on his deathbed, he said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." Basically, Buddha said, find out for yourself, ask questions. You know, and I find so many of the other religions are, we've got the answer, you've just got to toe the line. So personally, I find that very attractive about Buddhism, that it says we don't have all the answers for everybody, but you do. You know, you've got to find them for yourself. I find that an attractive thing in Buddhism.
Pramaha Sudchai is one of several Thai monks at Wat Samakhi Temple outside Christchurch. For the Thai community, adapting and accommodating traditional spiritual and cultural practices to a new environment has been very significant to settling well in New Zealand.
In Thai culture, they already know the Buddhism. They easy for them to study, but here some of them understand, but most of them don't understand Buddhism. We have the small place, and then we have a lot of bad thing happen because someone attacked us by the window, throw some rock and broken our window and the door or something like that. But it doesn't matter because we think just normal, because we come here, we don't have any ill will to anyone.
First, we didn't know whether we're going to have temple. Then we talk about it, then it's good to have a temple because all the Thai community come into one, and like we all share all the food, we bring all the food every morning. Yeah. We come here is for like take all the kind of like, we come here because it's happy, you know, because our family is so happy to be here, and the monk's so happy to talk to us because not many people are coming in and give monk food. I feel very sorry for the monk. Yeah. Well, here is very different. The monks not normally walk about like this. They're supposed to do the gardening, do the hose, you know, clean all the temple and everything. They can't just sit and do internet, which is we do it here, you know, internet, walk about, and they like travelling, like they travel maybe to Queenstown somewhere, and then in Thailand you're not supposed to go out anywhere. You just stay at the temple, you do chanting, you meditate, that's all you do here in Thailand.
And meditation, that's Buddha teaching us a lot of way to practice from the beginning, medium and high meditation. Like today, we just see some meditator, some yogi practice. They practice really extreme practice because they spend a lot of time here. 1 week, 1 month, and 1.5 they stay here. Not contact with anyone else outside. Just keep mindfulness by himself. And stay with present moment, acknowledge. Now you breathe in, breathe out normally and naturally, and take note on your stomach. Breathe in, rising, breathe out, falling, breathe in, rising, breathe out.
Within many Asian cultures, becoming a monk or nun is an accepted life path. For Westerners, however, the monastic path is far from conventional.
A deep, deep feeling that I had to become a monk. Why? I'd been meditating on death quite a lot at that time, and death and impermanence, so thinking about my own mortality and what I wanted to do with this life, because we all know that we have this one short life, and what do we want to do with it? And at that time I realized that I wanted to devote my life to spiritual practice and to revealing spiritual truths to other people as well, because I'd felt that from what I'd learned, I was able to find greater levels of happiness than I even thought possible, actually. So I decided, well, the best way to do that is to be in this aspect, the aspect of an ordained person. And in doing so, I was also able to put aside many of the things that have been distractions for me, relationships, intoxicants. For me, this had been a distraction. Other people, maybe not.
Well, family, because I have 4 children, they weren't terribly interested. They didn't really care. They just thought it was another one of Dad's crazy things he's going to do. So, no, I didn't get a great deal of reaction. Not as though I got support or non-support. It was just okay.
Has that changed at all? Or?
No, it's not. It's still the same. It's Dad's doing that, so that's okay.
So, is there any difficulty, do you think, in practicing within a culture that knows so little about Buddhism and that regards it as something foreign?
No, I don't think so. Definitely not. Actually, people are quite interested in it when they see you walking out in the community in your robes. The usual thing is that you get interest from people. Very seldom do you get any disparaging remarks. Occasionally you do, but you just let it go.
I think when I look back that all my life I've been wanting to find some way that I could just live a religious life, but it was absolutely not clear to me how I could do that, and most of the time I wasn't even conscious of any such idea. When I came to the Tibetans, I considered very carefully, should I become a Tibetan nun, but it didn't seem right. And in fact, I spent a lot of time trying to force myself into it, and it kept saying, no, it isn't right. And somehow when I came into contact with Daido Roshi and the Zen teachings, then the door opened, and he offers residencies to people who go from New Zealand. And so I went there for one of those residencies, but intending to stay. And the reason I can't do it in New Zealand is that Zen Mountain Monastery is at Mount Tremper up in New York State. I would like to move it to New Zealand if I could.
Well, as I said, I've had a very ordinary life, ordinary New Zealand girl, with all the associated activities and problems. And I've been married with children, and I've had several relationships, and so I was never very contented and had a lot of unhappiness, but no great tragedy, just the ordinary everyday problems. And so I wanted to find a way out of them, and I noticed that I wasn't having much success trying on my own. When I get up, I just put my robes on and do my water bowl offerings.
So what rules of conduct or routines do you follow as a nun?
Well, the pure morality is things like not killing, stealing, lying, avoiding the general negativities of body, speech and mind that all Buddhists are supposed to try to work towards. So in that way it's just a tightening of the usual Buddhist precepts when you become a monk and nun, but it adds celibacy to that. And of course one should wear the robes if one can. When I go to work I wear a uniform, and one has to have their heads shaved. And
then we need to really aim to serve all sentient beings or living beings throughout.
Every day in the morning, I get up early. If I have some time, I can pray and meditation. After the midday until the sunrise, and we have no food, just drink. That's stomach is rumble. So now I'm studying. So I have to go to study 5 days a week on the weekdays, and every night I have to pray and do the meditation. Yeah.
Many traditional Buddhist communities have been set in places of solitude. Although the majority of Buddhist centres in New Zealand are urban, the tradition of retreat continues here. This centre, belonging to the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, is located deep in the Coromandel bush. It offers a setting for intensified practice.
Well, at the moment there's a community here of about 7 people, and we operate the solitary retreat huts. We've got 5 solitary retreat huts located in the bush, and we're fundraising and starting to build on a new centre, developing a Buddhist centre up the hill, a retreat centre. And so we all work together in different ways to move that project forward.
Well, this is the beginnings of the retreat centre that we're building. It's 50-person. This is the main facility building here. Ultimately, it'll be the kitchen, dining room, lounge. But in the short term, it'll be used for everything, including dormitories and things. And we're going to build that first during this year, I hope. And it's the idea that you're moving from the outer to the inner. If you go out there, you've got the much wider open views. That's where the dining rooms and all the sort of worldly activities take place, and as you move into the site here, you get more and more into the bush, and it closes in around you. You move more and more towards the rooms that are used for contemplation and practice. That's the whole idea that they've built it around.
Within the FWBO we have different lifestyles. You know, most people are married or living with their partner. But there's a lot of people who choose to live in situations which are just for men or just for women, and that's very traditional. It's been in Buddhism from day one, and it's not something that we decided to do. It's something that just happened spontaneously, that the men and women decided that they wanted to live together, some of them, and so it's just something which has happened because those people feel it's good for them. Yeah. Of course, the relationship between, you know, human beings and nature is extremely important, and it's no wonder that, you know, people like to spend a lot of time, Buddhists like to spend a lot of time in nature.
In your opinion, what are the differences in approach between the ethnic communities and native New Zealand groups practicing Buddhism?
The ones that I've had most experience with would be the Southeast Asian countries, and the main difference would be that they have a much stronger devotional practice and also a stronger dana practice, and they are very strong in that, and less inclined to do the meditation. Not all of them, but in many ways it's like a cultural expression. Some are strong practitioners as well, but there is that very strong heart of supporting the monastery and the whole kind of being within a religious worldview, being immersed in a religious worldview, whereas the Westerners, including myself, aren't as readily able to pick that up typically.
That the ethnic groups tend to be preserving quite a chunk of their own culture, and we would notice that particularly in that if we went as a mixed group, men and women, the men would be welcomed in to the sitting room and go up to the front, and the women would have to stand down the back, and then after a certain while they would be asked if they would like to go to the kitchen and help to prepare the meal. And you know, this really wasn't the way we were doing it in New Zealand, the way we were doing it in the West. So we were wanting to preserve our culture, you might say. And I think that was the main thing that I noticed going to other groups, is that they do bring a large chunk of their tradition, and it's different.
I think there is no such thing as a New Zealand Buddhist as such. Therefore, it's the question of comparison or contrast is hard to make. New Zealand Buddhists are mainly Tibetan Buddhists, and as well as there will be Buddhists from Thailand, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. But then there are Buddhists, Asian Buddhists. New Zealand did not have Buddhists for a long time, not until 20 years ago.
They have a more monastic type of existence if they live in a nunnery. There's coming together every day for ceremonies and practice, which we don't have. We're much more have to be much more self-reliant with our practice. It's a real mind training, and what you do in your room on your cushion with your practice, and what you do out in your life with whomever you meet, that's the practice. And that's the same for the Tibetans as well, of course, but they have this formal life of the monk that we don't have.
The kind of nuances and the conditions, the kind of conditions we find ourselves in, the cultural context is different. And because there is a great support for practice and for a holy life, that in the traditional sense of the Buddhist journey, is quite supportive, whereas here there isn't that kind of support.
Zen Buddhism has travelled from Japan to the West and eventually to New Zealand. Since the Buddha's own time, retreats have been held to instruct and engage people along the spiritual path. This week-long Zen meditation intensive, attended by practitioners from throughout the country, is held annually in Christchurch.
I'm basically invited by the New Zealand Sangha of the Mountains and Rivers Orders to come each year and do various retreats. And so this year is typical of what we often do in January, so I usually begin with a public talk, and then we follow that with an introductory retreat, which is open to beginners, people who know nothing about Buddhism. And then we'll end with a week-long session, a meditation intensive retreat. In a teacher coming, there are other things that we can do. There's face-to-face teaching, there are Dharma talks, there's engaging the practice in a way that goes further than just sitting meditation. One of the things, most of them, that practitioners have been doing for centuries. And so this weekend we're going to be looking at those practices.
Well, I'm really here as a passenger. My friends in the New Zealand Sangha have been asking if I can come back and visit them, and they've put up the money, and so I'm coming along, and Shugen's the teacher, and I'm helping a bit here and there, but he could do it fine without me, so I'm just enjoying myself. So first of all, Zazen is called sitting Zen, and it's the focus of our training.
Buddhism is a non-theistic religious tradition, but it's not based in the concept of God. And yet we have services, we have altars, we chant, we bow. In our own tradition, there is, when we practice together, there is some measure of discipline that we bring to the practice, and a certain degree of formality, you might say, in the way that the meditation hall is conducted.
I think maybe with some it never enters their consciousness, but most people at some time are thinking, what is the point of this? Why am I here? Wouldn't the earth be better off without me? So if I shot myself right now, would it matter? What is the point? Is it just to continue the human race? Is there something else? We all begin to want to know that. And Zen and Buddhism, I think, are likely to be more attractive to New Zealanders who are independent-minded, because they say you've got to do it for yourself. Look inside, it's there. Nobody's going to help you or save you. You've got to do it yourself. New Zealanders are great do-it-yourselfers. I think it's made for them.
From China, Buddhism travelled to Korea and Japan. In the mid-20th century, as communists consolidated power in China, thousands of Buddhists fled to the island of Taiwan. It is from Taiwan that New Zealand Chinese Buddhism has its source. New Zealand's ethnic Chinese population now numbers more than 100,000 people, of whom 14,000 are Buddhist. The large size of the Chinese Buddhist community, as well as its financial strength, has allowed it to develop impressive centres, such as the Tsi Ming Temple in Green Lane, Auckland. One of the main organisations supporting the Chinese Buddhist community in New Zealand is Buddha's Light International Association. Currently located in a shopping mall in Howick, Auckland, this group runs weekly services and community projects.
Even though we originated from Taiwan, but the people that attend are basically Chinese, but Chinese from, say, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, and sometimes we have a couple of Kiwis. Religion, there's no nationalities in religions, so there shouldn't be limited to who's coming. During the service, we light up a lot of lights, which means representing not to light up the light outside our mind, is to light wisdom, the light of the wisdom inside us.
I think I brought up from the Buddhist family, yeah. Although it's kind of combined with our culture as well, but I think. When I was young, I always thought that I was a Buddhist.
But then, because we are preaching Buddhism from the Chinese culture to the European culture, so we have to adjust, and we have to do a certain adjustment before it can be totally adaptable by the local New Zealanders.
Buddha's Light has over 100 centres worldwide, including the 3 largest temples in North America, Australia and Africa. The group is now constructing a new temple in East Auckland. Its design is based on guidelines laid out in a Chinese manual of the 12th century. On completion, it will be the largest temple in New Zealand.
I think most of Chinese still are Buddhists. Yeah, so when they come to other countries, if they are Buddhist, they would look for a temple where they can go to, like kind of for spiritual needs and also for friends.
Every time I go to a new country, we all think that we learn more than we give, because there are a lot of things from the local people that we have learned a lot from the local people.
In Korea, everybody knows what is Buddha. Even that is Catholic cardinal. Even that person is Catholic cardinal, even Pope, I think. But here, people don't know what is Buddhism. In the beginning, first we were not familiar with this area, so we did not know what is there, what kind of mechanic, who is the best mechanic, who is the best electrician, we did not know. So unfamiliar was the difficulties. We did not know about the regulation and the law so well. People around here, they were curious, and few people, few families did not like we set up Buddhist temple that come from foreign country.
Like the Chinese temple, this group has strong organisational links to overseas Buddhist associations.
My master is Supreme Patriarch of Korean Buddhist Order in South Korea. He has felt sorry that there is not Buddhist society in New Zealand. And he encouraged me and my elder brother to set up one Buddhist temple.
Only 5% of the 20,000 Koreans in New Zealand are Buddhist, compared to 65% Christian. The small number of Korean Buddhists in New Zealand meant that funding for the temple would have to be found offshore.
100% of all finance we had to bring from Korea. So first, by the headquarters of Korean Buddhist Order, second from the Buddhist members, and also our own temples also. The people of New Zealand, they are very true and they are generally, mainly very innocent and very pure also. So this temple will have very good prosperity in the future.
Lay practice or lay practitioners had a very different role in the history of Buddhism, primarily one of supporting the monastics' practice through dana, through giving food, money, work, but not so much actually doing the religious practices that the monastics were engaged in. When Buddhism came to the West, that turned around.
Oh, well, in America, we're in the monastery, which is set. The whole thing is organized, and people move into a place where the behavior is a given. You know, you do this, you do that. And so the resistance isn't there. It's maybe there, but it's hidden. In New Zealand, people are still fighting with, well, why do we do it this way? It would make more sense to do it.
I think it's like when you go to do an apprenticeship with a carpenter, I mean, he might be an old man who has old-fashioned ways of doing things, right? But you have to learn his ways in order to, you have to kind of be patient and learn all his ways in order to have the lung of his practice, you know, the understanding of how he's the craftsman. And then once you have that, you know how to be the craftsman, then it's a natural change. You kind of, because you're a different person from that person, you live in a different era, things can change.
I think one of the things that attracted Westerners to the Vipassana or this kind of thing is that it was quite essential. It was just about sitting, learning meditation, and not really needing to so much pick up a whole cultural context as well.
Historically, Buddhism, as is true with most world religions, did not have a very, unfortunately, enlightened view of or relationship with women in terms of including them, granting them the same opportunities and as men. In coming to the West, that changed tremendously. We have men and women practicing together in most centers around the world.
We've had 7 women ordained here at the centre, and only Western women, and only 2 Western men. Women are very keen to develop spiritually. They're very, very committed to training their minds and developing more positive qualities. That's what I've seen.
Well, I think I was inspired to start this hospice because of having met Lama Sogyal Rinpoche, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and also His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says that Buddhists shouldn't just sit on their bums and meditate, they should actually get up and do some social service. And there was a need in Auckland to support people who were terminally ill with compassionate, practical care. And also the chronically ill we look after, because they often sit all day in a wheelchair and don't have anyone visiting them. So it's a good way to give them some social and intellectual and support.
One of the most conspicuous forms of Buddhism in New Zealand is the Tibetan school. When Chinese forces invaded Tibet in 1959, the Buddhist clergy was forced to flee their homeland and into the West, including New Zealand.
The monastery, I don't know the English language etymology, what monastery means, but in Tibet we call Gonpa. And Gonpa literally means the isolated place, and the quiet, silent, isolated place. This is the first I came here in the bush. There's a farmland. There's a few cows here, so, but we planted tree, lots, hundreds, thousands planted. We just, every month we do Thai puja, and today is one of them. Concentration, the part of the Dhamma in the past, Buddha's Bodhisattvas Here is because the structure of the temple is a monastery temple, but people here, Sangha is very much more westernized. Another means it's quite relaxed, flexible. Yeah. This is the particular temple is the symbol of the speech, and the Buddha statue is the symbol of body. A stupa is the symbol of the mind. So the body is speech and the mind. Yes. So this is the first stupa in New Zealand, or Southern Hemisphere means like that. Buddha was born, and one stupa. Buddha was enlightened, one stupa. And Buddha was first teaching, one stupa. So all the 8 occasions of the Buddha.
Buddhism has taken root in New Zealand and, boosted by immigration from Asia, it is now an established part of the country's spiritual life. But it is still very young. Set against the 2,500-year presence of Buddha Dhamma in Asia, and even against 200 years of Christianity in New Zealand, the history of Kiwi Buddhism is brief indeed.
Of course, we're part of society. We've got our responsibilities to other members of society, so we try and do that. I think Buddhism as a whole in New Zealand, all the different strands of Buddhism, well, it's a bit like immigrants in the country. You know, we're finding our feet and learning to interact with other aspects of New Zealand society. I mean, the whole of New Zealand society is very, very new anyway, except for the Maori tradition. So it's very unformed at the moment. It's very difficult to say, I think, what the connection is or what the relationship is.
It comes in many forms, drawing on traditions from throughout Asia. The variety of approaches to the spiritual path is likely to be to Buddhism's advantage in the future, helping this ancient philosophy, religion and way of life remain relevant within an increasingly diverse New Zealand. But catering to diversity is not, in itself, enough.
Here, my students or Western people here is spiritually, again, Buddhist teaching understanding is very good. It's very good. And but the one problem or danger, what you call it, is understanding in the head is not, doesn't do anything, you see. You have to practice it. And if you not practice, then only just talking is then like, you become like a parrot, you know. Is a parrot is a cup of tea. But actually you don't know what a cup of tea means, you see. Similarly, you might say, I'm teaching Buddhism, I'm teaching, but actually you don't know yourself, you know.
I think that I like this word ahipasiko, which means come and see. And I think that there is a danger of a superficial encounter. But the idea of the ahipasiko is that if someone is ripe or ready, or the conditions are there, then there'll be some potential, you know, and you can't force something down someone's throat. That's another thing that I've always enjoyed about Buddhism. There's no proselytizing, because it's understood that it's, you know, not such a good scheme. And also that whole thing about not being attached to views and opinions.
Beyond the centres, the temples, the monks and the nuns, the extent to which Buddhism has a future in New Zealand depends on the dedication of individuals.
As you get older, you tend to think, oh, I'm really too old to do that now, you know, and you begin to shut off your options. And people often shut off their options, I think, far too early. There's something that George Bernard Shaw said, which I remembered, or I read it years ago, and it's beautiful. He said, I believe, I don't know whether he was religious, I believe that the universe has the right to expect of me everything of which I'm capable. And when I die, I want to die totally used up. I don't want to go out as a flickering flat candle. I want to go out as a roaring furnace. I thought, oh, I do like that. And I think that ought to be the attitude of a monk. That, you know, they want to give the whole thing, and then when they give it, okay, I'll die.